The U.S. operation in Venezuela could serve, though, as a template for nation building for them as well. Former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Robert Ashley, says China's Xi and Russia's Putin can use this as their own justification for operations in their regions under an emerging world order that is defined not by rules or international norms, but by strong men executing operations in accordance with their personal interests. Let's bring in Academy Security's head of macro strategy, Peter Tchir, who works with the general, as well as Bloomberg Intelligence chief emerging markets credit strategist, Damian Sassower. And Damian, before we get to Peter on this broader issue, I want to get to you about one specific issue, which is that of the money owed to these big oil companies. We've been talking about it a little bit. President Trump has referenced it a number of times. What are the sums and what is the likelihood that they see that money?
Well, I think you're right to focus on the U.S. energy patch, right? Because the short-term impact of what's going on in Venezuela is going to show up first in ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, all of whom, according to the International Court of Settlements, are owed, in the case of ConocoPhillips, $10 billion, including interest payable. It's $1.5 billion to ExxonMobil. It's another $1.2 billion to Chrysler. I mean, Chrysler isn't listed anymore, but the first two are obviously seeing the benefits of that. And then it's the Gulf refiners, the ones who can handle that heavy sour crude oil out of Venezuela. They're also poised to benefit. That's Valero, PBF, Phillips 66. The ones that probably, you'd be a little bit bearish on here are the Alberta oil sands producers like Suncor, because obviously this heavy oil out of Venezuela is going to displace that to some extent. And then as it relates to the bond market, it's all about the Venezuelan PDVSA dollar bonds, which are up 8 points today, off the back of a 100% gain last year. I mean, granted, these bonds are trading at, call it 60% of what their value was when the country defaulted back in 2017, but today's move is pretty notable, to say the least.
Well, it's a country that has deep amounts of debt, and Peter, to bring you into this, China's also on the hook for some of it. Are we witnessing now a restructuring of not just the U.S. flexing its military might, but maybe in these cases coming in and changing the stack, changing priorities, and making sure that America gets the benefit over other countries when it comes to credit outstanding?
And we've been talking about this competition with China for 6-7 years, and this is really kind of an escalation to me. And we've had the trade war, but it's really mainland China versus the U.S. Now we're going to take the fight to Venezuela, right? We are going to fight for rights for our companies, for back pay, for things that were taken from us. China is clearly going to try and use their lawyers to fight for things that they believe they're entitled to. So I think this is really, you know how the Soviet Union, we always had these kind of proxy clashes. We had these clashes in other areas. I think this is the first time we're seeing that with China, and we're going to test how strong the resolve of people to stick to the Belt and Road Initiative is. I think China's made a lot of missteps. This could be a very big opportunity, but I think there could yet be friction, and that could be the only thing that hurts the U.S. markets of China's reaction.
Can I actually, I want to tug at one string there. Right there is obviously weaponry and warfare, there's economic warfare, and there are legal battles, right? How important is that third aspect to the competition between the U.S. and China?
I think it's hugely important, right? We are sitting here looking at, okay, we want this because you owe this, we're going to take this. China clearly wants to say the same sort of thing. This is going to set down in court of law. I think Trump is not necessarily...
In the U.S. court of law?
I don't know. It's going to be probably all over. I'm sure there's going to be some UK governance in this. There's going to be international. There's going to be a lot of debate over where it should be. The lawyers are going to get rich. In the meantime, I think Trump is going to try and continue what he's done in the U.S. is push boundaries and then prove that I'm wrong. So I think there's a real risk that this gets pretty contentious very quickly. And the nice thing on the economic side, we don't have this kind of advantage over China, but anything military, there's the tyranny of long distances. So Taiwan's hard for us to get to. South America is almost impossible. Chinese Navy's, it's better than it once was, but it nowhere near can project the power that the U.S. Navy can. So this becomes really interesting on that perspective in shipping.
Okay, so the lawyers get rich. I feel like that's the outcome of this in terms of
the bankers get rich.
Yeah,
the oil executives get rich.
Right, because this is something that you've written about too, Peter, this idea that the U.S. is going to be asking some serious concessions from oil majors who go into Venezuela. And Damian, I want to take that to you, this idea of just how much bonds can really benefit of not just Venezuela, but of oil producers and oil producer equities. Yes, they're up today, but are we going to look at a situation where, yes, they can go in, but they're going to be confronted with a surplus, more of a glut of oil, and a U.S. government who's not as friendly to them in what they demand for them as the outcome of them entering into Venezuela?
Well, we've been hearing all this talk about $100 billion is necessary to get Venezuela oil back online. It's not that. It's $15 to $20 billion to expand 500,000 barrels per day out of Venezuela. That's still 25% cheaper than the deepwater of projects we're seeing in Brazil and Guyana. So there is a benefit from a cost-benefit analysis to go into Venezuela because, look, I mean, a lot of that infrastructure, as dilapidated as it is still there. So there's a starting point there. And so, look, I mean, you're absolutely right. This is not about narco-terrorism. It's not about the Cartel of the Suns or Tren de Aragua. It's about China, and it's about supply chains. And that, to me, is the fact that China, look, has been buying discounted barrels from Venezuela in RMB. Look, the free lunch is over. And so China, if you saw out of Beijing this morning, Beijing called in all the big Chinese banks to say, hey, we got to assess what your credit exposure is to Venezuela because the world has just changed overnight.
By the way, what other assets are key in this economic warfare? I mean,
rare earths.
Exactly. So
I mean,
this is
minerals,
what happens there, Damien?
There's utilities. I mean, Ellicott used to be an issuer of U.S. dollar debt. There's tourism. I mean, huge coastline out of Venezuela. It is a huge opportunity, and that's why I think in any restructuring you're going to see out of Venezuela, you're going to have to give some sort of equity to the upside of GDP growth in Venezuela as a kicker to get investors back in there and to get them happy with the current state of affairs. And by that I mean GDP warrants, stuff that's going to link the future gains of creditors to the success of the Venezuela restructuring and transition. And I think you're going to see some sort of stuff along those lines.
Another asset is that I think we don't talk about enough, or not as much as rare earths, oil, and gold, is chip production capacity, right? That's all in Taiwan, or let's say 80 to 90% of it. Does China move to take Taiwan using some pretense, hey, they're selling drugs here too, you know, or do they hold off long enough for us to put chip capacity somewhere else?
So I don't think they're going to do anything reactionary. They certainly don't have the military capability probably today to take this over effectively and seamlessly and keep the chip industry intact. They will continue to put pressure on. I think we could see more gray zone tactics where they either disrupt, via cyber, something going on in Taiwan. Maybe they use the maritime militia to spread out. Having said that, we've been a big believer of ProSector. There's production for security, and Intel's been one of our top calls in that. I think you are just going to see a really aggressive push where the U.S. government kickstarted this, but it's American capitalism that's going to push it to the next step, right? People are scouring the universe for companies that have mining rights that have been unused. What technology do we have that can process and refine things? I think this just tells everyone, hey, this is serious. The world order is changing. We are going to produce and refine things here that we need for national security. Chips is going to be top of that line because we cannot afford to have China do that. And the realization's there that not only can we not afford it, China might do it, and B, we have the resources if we effectively focus to do it ourselves. So I'm very excited about that part.
Well, it also just shows a President Trump who is willing to take drastic actions, even if there is a threat that he gets pushback from markets, from political standings. It throws to the wayside any idea of a taco trade, at least when it comes to geopolitics. So how should we take Trump's threats with Colombia, with Cuba, with Greenland? Should we look at those differently now?
I think you can take a look at them differently. I think in each case, the one thing I want to pull back is I do think there is an element to the cartel attacks here that is understated. So one, right, we have a lot of forced migration out of Venezuela. People have not liked it. If you make it a safer, more productive society, partly by killing off the cartel, that's good. A lot of the crime in the U.S. that has happened from illegal immigration tends to be from these cartel members. So if you cut off the head of the snake, do they wither and die? But more importantly, I think this is going to set up the stage for late Q1, late Q2, serious talks with Mexico and say, Ms. Sheinbaum, it's now time to do something about your cartels. You can do it with our help, or we can do it without your help. But something is going to be done about the cartels in Mexico, right? We've set up a lot of new rules of engagement. We've shown that we're willing to do stuff. This operation was phenomenal, right? We come in, clearly there was inside help to make it so successful. So he doesn't have the support, Maduro. I think if you're the cartels in Mexico, this is a really strong message to you. And again, that would probably be the best thing that could happen to Mexico, is getting rid of their cartels. And then you can really see this North-South America alliance grow and be extremely profitable.
What happens then to those currencies? What happens then to that debt? I mean, I'm looking at WCRS Go on the Bloomberg terminal, right? And I put in emerging markets currencies. The dollar has done fairly poorly against a lot of them over the last 4 quarters.
Right, over the last 4 quarters. But now what you're looking at here is a little bit something different. And for me, look, I mean, this is definitely a dollar. This fuels the dollar bearish view from a foreign investor standpoint to the U.S. So I think in the short term, you could see the dollar weaken on this because, as you rightly point out, Trump is showing very little regard for the interests of other countries.
The dollar weakened against the broader basket or against these EM currencies?
Broad dollar weakness. Now, let's talk about Latin America. Latin America is rife with high yielders. Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia are the highest yielding countries from a fixed income standpoint that you're going to find anywhere in emerging markets. And if you're going to see dollar weakness and you're going to talk about higher yields, well, my goodness, I'm an EM investor. I'm looking to carry in those countries. That's just me. So I think it's actually bullish for the currencies of those three countries. Now, let's be also clear. Colombia has an election in May. And by the way, the pivot to the right is real. Pivot to the right meaning pro-U.S. So I do believe that, Gustavo Petro is not going to be in power for that much longer. I mean, he won't be. The next person to take that chair is going to be more pro-U.S. in my opinion. And you got Brazil at the end of this year as well. And look, Lula has got 9 lives, don't get me wrong. But, he will be pro-U.S. if that serves him. And so it's going to be very interesting. Claudia Sheinbaum has shown a willingness to work with the Trump administration in Mexico. Again, all of these three countries, they had to kind of come out against this action in support of the UN Charter. But let's see where things are over the medium term.
Just like the vice president, right? Delcy Rodriguez, her first couple of speeches were fiery, anti-American.
For sure.
Bring back Maduro.
Quickly changes her tone.
And exactly. And last night she's like, you know what? We're willing to work with you.
Well, but Damien, how much of this, because those views you could have had them before this all happened. Yeah. How much has changed now? How much has changed now that Trump is reimposing not a Monroe doctrine, in his words, a Don Roe doctrine?
The only thing that's changed for me, quite honestly, is I was very, very constructive on the dollar coming into this year, thinking, okay, maybe we'll see a little bit of weakness, but by and large, I expect broad dollar to be up in 2026. Now I'm not so sure, because this definitely fans the flames of all the dollar bearish talk that's out there about the U.S. the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency and how that needs to end. And it is good course of business by these other countries to diversify their exposure into other currencies. I'm not suggesting that it's not going to happen. The question is, will it be enough to cause the dollar to weaken relative to the broad basket? I'm not so sure, but certainly today I'm a little less bullish on the dollar than I was, just at the end of last year.
Can I just ask one more, Peter, about Russia? Because it's not clear. We want to have dominance over China and get them out of Venezuela. But do we want dominance over Russia as well? I mean, we let their tanker go with no fight at all, right? The Bella 1, which is now called the Marinera. They painted the Russian flag on the side, and the Russians said, that's ours. And we haven't touched it.
Well, I think that's a great question. One, I think we're going to go back. When we talk about emerging markets this year, we have to be very specific and regionally specific. I think South America, great place. Central and South America, there's an ETF, ILF. That's an interesting way.
Great place to invest.
I do not want Asia necessarily. I don't want, so EM is too broad. You need to be more specific. I think with Russia, it's unclear. I think he did not want to push a fight with Putin right now. We've got enough to handle with this area. Again, if we're not done with maybe Cuba and Colombia, I think he lets Putin get away with some stuff for now, and then we figure it out. But I think both Putin and Zelensky have to be like, okay, the next time the president comes and threatens us or tells us, if you don't do this, this might happen, we have to take this much more seriously. Again, I think we're reestablishing deterrence. We did it when we attacked the nuclear facilities in Iran. I think we're doing this now in there. And, deterrence, it's a bit scary, but you really have to use and show your willingness to use your capability to have anyone feared. And for the last 10, 15 years, right, the U.S. kind of drew red lines in the sand or lines in the sand and like, yeah, we're not going to back that up. We're now backing these things up. We're being aggressive. I think it's changing the calculus. So while it's direct confrontation with China, I think it's given every world leader in a precarious position something to think about, and probably not good for them.
Here, just less than a minute, but isn't this also just a huge U.S. control of the oil industry now? 40% of the production in North America now overseas?
Yeah, and I think it's going to change the negotiations that we go through with the USMCA renegotiations that are going through. One, I think Mexico is going to have to figure out how they fit in. I think that's where the protection is going to come on the cartels. Canada with the tar sands. Okay, how do we now play nicer? Because there are huge advantages with what Canada has. There's already a lot of refineries set up in the middle of the Midwest to take that. There is a lot going on, and I think it creates this opportunity for almost this fortress North America where we can be very, very successful on this production for security.
Really seismic changes. Peter Tchir, Damien Sassower, thank you both so much.